Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, a quick look at Appendix C, the muscular system. And this is to help sort of clarify what apparently causes some issues with students when it comes to understanding exactly what they're trying to explain to you in this appendix. And if you do understand it and it makes sense to you, that's great. But for some reason, I'm always asked the same question. What exactly are they telling us in this appendix? In other words, concentric function, eccentric, isometric function. What exactly are they saying when we put down concentrically accelerates, eccentrically decelerates? And the answer is I'm not really sure why they made it so complicated or difficult to understand this, but let me break it down for you, make you understand it really very simple. The point of the appendix is to give you what's known as the kinesiological function of the particular muscle. In other words, what does it do over the joint or joints that it works over? So go to page 859. It's going to be like this for every one of these muscles. That's actually pretty good information in here. Very helpful if you understand what you're reading. So look at the lower leg musculature and anterior tibialis. That muscle's on the front part of the shin, just lateral aspect of the shin, and it pulls your toes up, right? It's called dorsiflexion, right? And you've seen that probably in the text somewhere. If you've done the BDU materials, you've seen it. Dorsiflexion is toe to nose, right? Toes to nose. That's why you always remember pulling the toes up. That's called dorsiflexion. That's the kinesiological function of the tibialis anterior. Okay. If I point my toes down like I'm planting a seed in the ground, that's called plantar flexion. Now let's go to the videotape, as they say. So let's go to page 859 and look at the anterior tibialis. What is its concentric function? To concentrically accelerate dorsiflexion and inversion. In simple terms, its function in the concentric when it is shortening is to produce dorsiflexion. Now, why concentrically accelerates? Because the muscle, when it goes through its concentric contraction, can move that foot up. So concentrically accelerate for your purposes, for the purposes of a trainer, what you would be doing out in the real world. Just look at the word dorsiflexion and inversion. Concentric contraction produces dorsiflexion and inversion. Okay, so that means that the plantar aspect of the part that touches the ground goes in towards the medial aspect of your body, right? So midline of the body, whoop, inversion, eversion. So dorsiflexion and inversion. That's what it does. So please don't let the term concentrically or the terminology concentrically accelerates dorsiflexion and inversion. Just look at it and say dorsiflexion and inversion. Concentrically, it produces this movement where the toe comes up off the floor. Now, the reason this is helpful now is because when you look at its eccentric function, it's the exact opposite. So what they're saying then is that concentrically, as the muscle shortens, it produces dorsiflexion and inversion. However, when it goes through its eccentric contraction, when the muscle is lengthening, right, when the tibialis anterior is lengthening, the joint goes through plantar flexion, and this is where the confusion comes in. The kinesiological function of a muscle, any muscle that we talk about, skeletal muscle, is normally understood when we talk about kinesiological function, is normally understood to be during the concentric. Okay, I hope that makes sense. In other words, the biceps, kinesiologically, the biceps, when they shorten, right, under tension, so concentric contraction is when the muscle shortens under tension. Under tension produces elbow flexion, right? Elbow flexion. Now, the tricep produces, right? Concentrically, the tricep brings it back to its extended position. What NASM wants you to understand is that it's also understood that a muscle doesn't just go through a concentric contraction. So the bicep doesn't just go through a concentric contraction where it shortens and produces flexion. When you're doing a dumbbell curl, you are also lowering the weight down. So eccentrically, it is decelerating, or it is slowing the movement back down. So, and this is where it gets confusing, which is why I'm not really sure it's the best way to explain it. But because the bicep can flex the elbow, it can also allow the elbow to go through extension in its eccentric deceleration. Hope that makes sense. Every muscle that you work, right? So we'll use the bicep as an example. When it goes through its concentric contraction or its shortening phase, will make the angle of the joint, right, decrease or increase, whatever it is. If it's the tricep, the contraction of the tricep creates an increase in the angle of the joint, of the elbow joint. Decrease in the angle of the elbow joint is flexion produced by the bicep through its concentric phase. What NASM wants you to kind of keep in mind is that there's also the eccentric phase of a muscle. And they're correct. It's true. So the muscle can shorten under tension, and I can let the dumbbells down, and now my bicep goes through an eccentric contraction. This is why understanding kinesiology is important, because kinesiology has to do with the skeletal system. Okay, the skeletal system. Remember, elbow flexion is the skeleton, right? It's the movement of these two limbs, body segments. Okay, just so happens that the muscles are what's producing the movement, but the pure kinesiological function is just the skeletal system. Okay, it's putting them together, right? Having the muscle expressing the muscle action that's producing the skeletal movement. Okay, that's why they're explaining this to you. So concentric function, meaning when the muscle shortens, produces tension, shortens against a load. Okay, as it shortens, it produces flexion. I'm talking about the bicep. In the case of the anterior tibialis, it's dorsiflexion. So when it shortens, it moves the joint through dorsiflexion, right? As it lowers back down under tension, it's the exact opposite movement. So that's the way to remember this. If the concentric contraction produces this movement, the eccentric contraction produces the reverse movement in a decelerated phase. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the other muscles. Think about your deltoid, right? What is the kinesiological function of the deltoids? Remember, when we say kinesiological function, we are talking primarily the concentric contraction phase. Okay, so the deltoids do what? When they contract concentrically, they abduct the shoulder. Okay, fair enough. Easy to remember. Shoulder abduction, right? Just like elbow flexion for the bicep. Okay, so abduction on the concentric phase. But remember, if I'm holding dumbbells up here, the dumbbells are also pulling down, and I've got to slow it down or decelerate that movement down. Well, technically, now the deltoid is going through its eccentric phase, right? It goes up from this position. Now it lengthens, right, to decelerate the movement of my hand down. Well, what movement is this? From this position to this position. Kinesiologically, at the shoulder, this is called adduction. So the concentric phase of the deltoid contraction, concentric, right, contraction, is abduction, accelerated abduction. And therefore, what's the opposite? Eccentric. So it's concentric up, eccentric down. So what's the opposite of abduction? It's adduction. And that's how you read this. So posterior tibialis concentrically accelerates plantar flexion, whoop, right? Toe pointing down. Well, what's the eccentric? Decelerate dorsiflexion. Don't let it confuse you. These are just opposite kinesiological functions, because the muscle goes through a concentric phase and an eccentric phase, as long as there's tension on the muscle. Again, I hope that's helpful. Look at your hamstring complex. Let's just go to 861. Concentrically accelerates knee flexion. Stop. Don't look any, right? Concentric knee flexion. Hamstrings. Concentric knee flexion. Concentric contraction flexes the knee. Okay, what's the opposite of the concentric? It's the eccentric. So when the hamstrings are lengthening now, you did a leg curl and you pulled the weight all the way up. Now the weight's got to go back down, for instance. That's going to be the eccentric, and you are slowing the movement downward or decelerating the eccentric. So what if it's concentric is flexion, knee flexion, then the opposite of that is knee extension. Eccentric function eccentrically decelerates knee extension. And that's how you read through it. It's not a bad idea to read through all these different muscles and get a good idea of exactly what their kinesiological functions are. Yes, they're giving you way more information probably than you need. And yes, I know there is an isometric function in there as well, but that's just when the muscle is no length changing under tension, right? So isometric, iso, same metric length, right? So isometric, same length, but there's tension developed. And you can read that dynamically. You'll see dynamically, isometrically, yada, yada. Stabilizes the blah, 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 right? You'll see stabilizing all of these isometric functions. That's one of the important things about doing your exercises properly. I hope this was helpful. Just let us know in the comments section below. If you did find it helpful, you understood it, then write the word understand. Remember to subscribe to the channel, share it if you want, right? You can also hit that notification bell, make sure you know when all the new videos are coming out, and let us know how we can be of assistance with helping you pass your NASM exam. Take care and have a great week. We'll see you.